everyone. How are you going? Hopefully you can hear me all. It's wonderful to be here with you this evening. It's of course unfortunate that we can't be together in person, but this is a close second best, I would say. And as Sarah was saying, we've got quite an exciting evening ahead of us. For about the next hour or so, we're going to be talking about smartphone photography, or really just photography in general, I would say, because with our main goal with learning smartphone photography is simply to learn the techniques of photography, and then the smartphone is really just a tool that we will use in order to achieve that. Now, there's going to be a few things we'll do today. You'll be watching me talk a little bit. I've got some slides for us to go through as well. There's a few practical exercises thrown in the mix too. There are a couple of apps that we will be using tonight. One is the Lightroom app and one is the PixArt app. So if you haven't downloaded the two of them yet, I'd recommend that you do. You will need to sign in when you first open the app as well. So it's worthwhile just getting that out of the way sooner rather than later too, so that when we get to those sections we can jump straight into it. I don't think there's too much else I really need to say. I am curious to know what sort of phones people are using tonight, whether you're using iPhone or Android. Maybe just let me know in the chat section. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat section as we go today, so if you have any questions, pop them in there for me. If I miss any, that's fine. We've got a little bit put aside at the end for a Q&A, so I'll try and get to them then. The apps that we're using tonight, regardless of the system that you're on, are universal. So both Lightroom and PixArt you'll be able to use on either phone. Lightroom and PixArt they are. I will have them in some slides in a second if you're unsure what the actual word is or how it's spelt. But let's jump into some slides and start talking a little bit about photography and talking about the things that we're going to learn tonight. Okay, so these are the sort of four general topics that we're going to talk to tonight. We're going to talk about the principles of photography, and I've got a little bit of a list of things that we're going to sort of cover with that. We're going to talk about using the Lightroom camera. So the Lightroom app has two parts to it. One is an advanced camera that's a little bit more sort of advanced than what your default camera would be on your phone. We're also going to talk about editing your photos in Lightroom and also organizing photos in Lightroom, which is a really big thing that I think, and manipulating your photos in PixArt. So I have a nice little exercise for us to do there that's a little bit different and sort of quirky. Now, when I talk about the principles of photography, these are the sort of 8 terms that I've put aside for us to sort of discuss. And you can think of these as the sort of theory component of tonight. So we're going to talk about narrative. So much of photography is about storytelling, about using a visual language in order to share a moment or an experience with someone. And it doesn't really matter what we're photographing. We really want to make sure that we're communicating some of that story through to our viewer. We're going to talk about composition. There's a few rules to follow that'll help you with your composition, and this will help you sort of make your photos a little bit more exciting, a little bit more unique. We'll talk about how to read light and how to use light to your advantage. We're going to talk about perspective and how changing perspective or using the two lenses on your phone, if you have a multiple lens phone, can really help transform the image. We're going to talk about form, how we can use shape in order to create dynamic compositions and relationships between our elements within the photograph. We're going to talk about space and how we can use space in order to craft an interesting image. And then lastly, we've got exposure and focus, which are probably the two least exciting things in that list. They're the two technical things, whereas the others are more creative. However, they're the two things that we really want to start to nail every time that we take a photo. Now, as far as the practical stuff goes, I've got a few different examples for us to look at today. I've got some portraits that we're going to talk about. We will be taking a selfie, so I hope everyone's okay with that. We're also going to talk about food photography as well, and I know there's some stigmas about selfie and food photography out there, but you're just going to have to trust me a little bit, because I assure you it's going to help us become better photographers. We're going to talk about how to use light in portraits and also abstracts in order to create interesting sort of forms. And then we've got the Lightroom app and we've got the PixArt app. The PixArt app will be doing double exposures in. Now, I'm just going to leave this definition on the screen for a second. So this is the definition of photography, drawing with light. And I really want to emphasize this before we get into the nitty-gritty of things. Because as photographers, we really want to be thinking about the light all around us, all the time. And this doesn't necessarily have to happen just when we pull the camera out, but it can be something that you start to be really present to in your everyday sort of experiences. Now, the direction of the light, the color of the light, the intensity of the light, all these different things can control how an image looks. And what we're looking at when we actually see things is you're not seeing an actual object, but you're seeing light bounce off that object. Light gives three-dimensionality to things. It can make things appear flat. It can do all sorts of interesting things. And we don't want to be sort of just passive to the light. We want to be active in how the light works, so that we can start to use that light to make more interesting images. Before I go on too, I will say I have written a quite comprehensive handout, but I believe Sarah's emailed out to you as well. So if you haven't got that already, maybe let us know in the chat, because I want to make sure I get that to you. But that's going to have everything that we talk about tonight, all written down, all with photographic examples as well. And I've created that specially for you so that you can take something away and refer back to it once the session is done. Let's jump back into the content and we'll see what we're coming up with next. All right, so these are the couple of points I really want to make about smartphone cameras. I'm not a big tech head myself. I don't care so much for technology. For me, I just want something that gets the job done. And smartphone cameras hold a really unique position in the camera world. They've got two big pros. The first one is that they're convenient and they're innovative. And I'm sure you all can understand these two attributes as well. By far, smartphones are the most convenient kind of camera that we have on us. I mean, look at the size of this thing. You can literally fit it in your pocket. It's amazing. My dream is that my professional interchangeable lens system could be this small, and maybe one day it will. Because honestly, my smartphone is my favorite camera to use. It's on me all the time, it's quick and easy, and I don't need to think about photography quite as much with my smartphone as I do with my bigger camera. The thing that smartphones do well is that they're very software driven, so they have good technology as far as the software goes, and they're constantly innovating on that front too. So major innovations are things like the portrait modes that they have these days, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But there are some drawbacks, okay? So like everything, when you're fitting a lot of things in a small package, it comes with some negatives. And for smartphones, the two biggest drawbacks are the small size of their sensor and also their limited zoom capabilities. So what does this actually mean in terms of how our photos turn out? Well, the small sensor size is particularly a big problem when it comes to poor light. And you might have noticed this before if you've used your smartphone to take photos at nighttime, or if you've taken them in a dark room before. Even the light that you have around you at the moment will be quite dull for a smartphone. And they really struggle to get good, clear, crisp images in low light. So when we're doing smartphone photography, we want to think about how we can get as much light into the scene as possible, because that's going to greatly help in improving image quality. The second thing is the zoom on smartphones. So this is something that manufacturers have started to address recently by creating multi-lens for camera phones. You might have a camera that's like that. If you've got anything over the iPhone 10, maybe. I actually have no idea. But most modern smartphones these days will have a dual lens system, and that normally means one wide angle and one telephoto lens. Some of the other newer phones have three lenses, so they have an ultra wide as well. And they actually have separate lenses in order to achieve different parts of the zoom range. That's because if you've used your default camera before and you've used the traditional sort of pinch in on the screen and zoom, what that is actually called is a digital zoom. So it's not actually using moving elements in order to get you closer or further from something, it's just cropping into the image. And what that creates is resolution loss very quickly. The more you zoom in by using that pinch and drag method, the worse the image quality you'll get. So keep that in mind, particularly if you've only got a single lens phone. You want to avoid zooming as much as possible. If you do need to zoom, use the twin lens function if you've got that there. Okay. let's talk about some of these principles of photography. We're going to break them down, and we're going to talk about, well, we're going to first start with narrative, and we're going to talk about, I've taken 3 photos for us to talk about today. One is a food photograph, one is an abstract photo using some forks, and one is a portrait. And we're sort of going to break down these 3 photos, talk about how they were created, talk about the things behind the image as well that you can start to be more conscious of while you're taking your own photos, and we'll talk a little bit about the technical stuff as we go. And there'll be some practical exercises sort of thrown in the mix too. Now, the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, what is the story? What's the narrative? And I said at the start that it doesn't really matter what kind of photograph you're taking, there's always a story behind it. I'm gonna take that back a little bit now. So the 2 photos on the end here, the food photograph and the portrait, are what I would call illustrative photos. They're there to convey some sort of information to the viewer, whether it's a meal that's being created or a person. I'm going to keep talking about myself in the third person, but I think you know it's me. I'm wearing the same jumper tonight. Whereas the photo in the middle is an abstract photo, and abstract photos are typically more formalist in nature. They typically don't have some sort of hidden narrative. But let's talk about the narrative of the story on the 2 end ones. Now, I'm going to talk about the photo on the left, but in the chat, I'm just curious to hear what you think the story is of the photo of the right. As we break down the photo on the left, throw some comments in there for the photo of the right. I'm curious to hear what you get from it. When I'm talking about narrative in photos, typically what I talk about is the 5 W's. So you might have heard these before. That's who, what, when, where, and why. And I feel like these are really good ways of sort of grounding a narrative in a photograph just as much as they are in any sort of literature. So let's break the story down for this photo on the left. The who. I would say the who in this photo is the brownies. They're the real hero of the story, and they're the ones that when I've created this photo, I've really tried to accentuate. Particularly the plate of 3 brownies is where our eye ends up in this image. And there are a number of different tricks that I've used in order to create that effect. The what is it? Well, it looks like it's a cook has done this of some sort. Maybe they've made it at home. They've just finished their cooking in the kitchen, and they've decided to take a photo to show off their creation. This was actually made by my lovely partner. She baked this for me the other day, or me to order to take photographs of it, and so that's why. I mean, the what for today is really that I've taken the photo for this class, but there's certain things that we read into it. The where, I would say this is a domestic setting. There's a few different clues for that, but the mess is one of them. The sort of haphazardness of the props that are put around, the plates, the utensils, all these sorts of things paint the image that it's a domestic or a home sort of setting, rather than maybe, fine French dining or something like that. The where, what have I done? Who, what, where, when is next. When, I would say the moment of this photo is just after they've been cooked and just before they're ready to be consumed. And we get a couple of clues to that there, but we can see there's a few cups of coffee around, a couple of different forks. We've got the brownies put on a serving plate. So they haven't been eaten yet, but it looks like they're pretty close to that stage. And the last one, the why. Well, there's all sorts of things you can sort of read into that, but I would say the why this photo has been taken, or the effect that I'm going for, is maybe some sort of social event or celebration. There's clues into that too. There's 2 cups of coffee, for example, and 2 forks, so we can assume that there's more than one person there. There's also more than one serving of brownies. These things aren't done by accident. They're done in a way in order to craft a certain narrative. So, who, what, when, where, why. I'm not going to give you the narrative devices for the photo on the right-hand side, but pop down some ideas to some of those 5 questions in the chat, and think about what I was trying to convey when I took this image. Again, it was actually my partner who took that image for me. She's not a photographer, but we still managed to create a pretty captivating photo, I think, with a few sort of simple tricks. All right, next we're going to talk about composition. So composition is a big part of photography, and it's one of those things that is a really sort of, It's not a hard skill to learn. There are a few things, a few rules that can sort of be followed in order to improve your composition. There's particular ways that the human brain sees certain things, and this has been proved by science. It's been used in art for many, many centuries, many thousands of years, and we can follow some of those rules when we start to create our own compositions. Now, I will say, as far as composition goes, don't think of the rules as gospel. Think of them as guidelines, because part of the beauty of photography is learning the rules so that you can learn to break them. But I found when I was learning photography in particular, having a few rules in my back pocket really helped in order for me to start creating more interesting compositions. Now, the first one we're going to talk about is the rule of thirds. You might have heard of this one before. The rule of thirds is a classic rule out there in photography, and what it basically boils down to is breaking the image into threes: a top, middle, a bottom, a left, middle, and right, and you can put elements of your photo either on the intersections or on the lines themselves. It's derived from the golden ratio. If some of you may have heard of the term golden ratio before, it's one of those things that are found not just in art but in nature and all sorts of different places, but it's been around for literally thousands of years. And you'll notice in each one of these photographs, the food photograph, the abstract photograph, and the portrait, the rule of thirds is heavily at play. And you can use rules like these regardless of the kind of image that you're shooting. So in the photo of the left-hand side, we can see quite clearly the plate of brownies falls on the intersection of this third here. And that's one of the things that helps our eye go to of where your eye ends up, and the rule of thirds helps with us there. And then lastly, if we look at the portrait, we can see that the face falls about on that upper third, and not exactly on the right hand side, but it's pushing to the right hand side. So it's not, as I said at the start, you don't need to think of this as gospel. Think of it as general guidelines. Use the rules to sort of get you started, but always go with your gut when it comes to composition. Now, another rule in composition is the use of lines, and we can use lines all the time in photography in order to guide a viewer's eye around the frame. Again, let's break these photos down. So in the left-hand photo, we've got lots and lots of elements and lots of lines. And if you actually draw some little lines along the elements in the image, you can see that all the lines point inwards and all the lines sort of end up so that we end up back down at this brownie. If you imagine that we take a sort of journey around this photograph, we've got the tea towel that's pointing in here, or we've got the baking tray or the cutting board that's sort of pointed this area, but then the handle of the mug, not just placed there by accident, points us back down toward this plate of brownies, and it creates this beautiful cyclical motion as we move around. Again, we've got a cyclical motion in this abstract photo too here. So we have the lines created by the forks, and then we have the lines created by the shadows as well. And these sort of create a bit of a triangle composition, which end up back around here, which you'll remember from before was about on this intersection of the rule of thirds. And then lastly, in the portrait, again, we've got lines from different elements in the scene. We have the line created by the armchair. We also have lines created by the arms and by the shoulders, and that all points us back to the face, which in portraiture is always the most important element in the photograph. Okay, so let's break portraits down a little bit more, and let's talk about light and perspective in the instance of portraits. Now, light and perspective are something that it doesn't matter what you're photographing, they're always super, super important. But what portraits will give us is an easy opportunity to sort of look at these things very specifically and look at what a difference certain perspectives and certain lighting can really make to the image. Okay, so before we get into that, there's a couple of things I'm going to give you, some tips for portrait photography. You always want to focus and expose for the face, and you always want to focus and expose for the highlight side of the face. So that's this side of the face here. You want to avoid busy backgrounds, particularly things behind people's heads. You don't want to use your flash, okay? Phone camera flashes are absolutely atrocious. Turn them off. Don't use them. I can't really think of any reason why a flash would improve a photograph. We want to work with the natural light. You want to use your telephoto lens if you can, and I'm going to show you an example as to why in a little bit. We want to shoot from eye level generally as well, so we've got a neutral sort of perspective with our subject. And last thing too is when you're taking photos of people, make them feel comfortable. Have a chat with them while you're taking a photograph. Understanding how your camera and how the apps work really help too, because the less you're fiddling around with your equipment, the easier it is to take photos and you don't appear flustered in front of your subject. If you're flustered, the subject will be too. Okay, so let's have a look at some photos here. We're going from the photo on the left to the photo on the right. And let's talk about the photo on the left first. It's quite bluntly terrible. It's a shocker. This is what we want to avoid, okay? Now, there are so many things wrong with it, it's hard to know where to start, but the lighting's bad. We're getting very strong backlight from the windows behind me. It's always very, very difficult to photograph a portrait when you've got strong backlight like this. Another classic example is having someone standing with a sunset behind them. You're never going to get the sunset and them in the photo. It's very, very hard. We've got glare from this backlight too. You'll notice I'm getting some weird sort of washed out effects over my face there. Way too dark. My face is completely in shadow. The composition's not very flattering. I got this pole sticking out of my head. Always a giveaway that you haven't thought about your composition when you end up with something like this. And the pose isn't very flattering either. You can definitely tell I've been in lockdown for a few months. I got a bit of a belly going. It's not super attractive. So let's think about some ways we can begin to improve this. Okay, so the first thing we can do is change the angle so that we fix the lighting. So rather than the lighting coming from behind the subject, behind me, now it's coming from the side. And you'll find that side light or front light is always more flattering for portraits than any sort of backlight is. There are some exceptions to that rule, but just take that to start with. Try and have side light or front light when it comes to using your portraits. You can see here by using this slide light, it immediately is slimming down my face because half my face is in highlight and half my face is in shadow, as compared to the big black blob here. Just have a look at the difference in my chin with this one, how round it looks there compared to here. It's still just as round. You know, I haven't done anything between those two shots, but I look slimmer in this one, which is quite amazing. Now, there's still a couple of problems with this photo though. I don't have a pole behind my head anymore, but I've got some plants there instead. So the background's still awkward and the pose is still awkward as well. So let's fix those two things. Now, as far as this instance, it was a matter of moving those plants so they weren't directly behind my head. Still kept them in the photo so they're giving a bit of context to the environment, but they're not interfering with the subject anymore. You can't always move things in the background, so if you can't move the background, it's going to be a matter of you repositioning the subject and probably repositioning yourself as well. With the pose, with hands, it's always good to do something with your hands. You know, don't just sort of have them hanging there limp. Put them in your pockets, put them in your lap, cross your hands, put them behind your back, just something so that they're not just awkwardly sort of hanging there. With your limbs, always bending the limbs and creating triangles will create an interesting sort of dynamic in the photo. So we can see here, we talked about this with the lines before, by bending that elbow, we're creating some nice lines in the image, and we're also making a more relaxed sort of engaging pose too. Mel, the photographer, my partner, was talking to me during this. She was telling me how handsome I was. And I'll tell you what, sounds ridiculous, but it put a smile on my face and it definitely put me at ease. She came to photography and talking to her subject as a natural. Now, the last thing we can really do to make that photo pop is to use the portrait mode on the camera. Okay, not every camera is going to have this. My smartphone actually doesn't have portrait mode. I've got an iPhone 8, so not all of us are going to be able to do this, unfortunately. But if you can use portrait mode, what it'll do is just blur out the background. If you look at the difference between the background in this shot and the background in that one, how much the subject sort of pops out from the background just by giving it a bit of blur. They're created through the dual lens system, and they're actually created through software, unlike an interchangeable lens camera where it would be created through the lens itself. Now, the portrait mode doesn't work in every situation, okay? It works best with silhouette style shapes. Now, there's a good thing about being bald, and that is because the portrait mode works really well for bald people because I am pretty much a silhouette, all right? There's no bits sort of sticking out here. But if you're photographing someone with really frizzy hair, for example, the camera has a hard time cutting that hair out from the background. And what you might notice is that you start to get like a blurry sort of halo around the actual person. I was taking some photos of our cat the other day, and one thing I noticed was that his face was still sharp in the portrait mode, but his whiskers were completely blurred out. Because the whiskers has come off the side of the face, it hadn't really done a good job at sort of removing them from the background. So keep that in mind. Now, if you're unsure how to get to portrait mode, it changes from camera to camera. What I'll quickly do is just share my phone with you, and let me escape out of that. I'm using an iPhone. If you're using an Android, this will be through your default app. So portrait mode is something that you need to go through your default app to use. And it's probably the one reason to use the default app over the Lightroom app, which I'm going to show you in a little bit. So I'm just connecting my phone to my screen here. But it's great. It works really well for portraits, and it is worthwhile having a bit of a play around with. Share my screen again. Oh, cool. So you should be able to see my phone. Now, if I just pull up, where's the, no, that's not what I want. There we go. So I'm just pulling up my phone here, my camera, and I've got portrait mode. Okay, there's just a couple more things that I want to share with you first. Now, we talked about perspective, and what is perspective? I think of it as the relationship between the photographer, the subject, and the background as well. And there are two things you can do. You can move on the horizontal axis, and you can move on the vertical axis. And you can also move forwards and backwards. Three things, actually. Lens choice comes into play a little bit too with perspective, but let's jump into some photos. So we've just had a look at this photo, and this is a perspective change. And this is a perspective change along the horizontal axis that's fixed this problem by moving so that the light is to the side of the subject and behind the photographer. We've improved the lighting of the subject drastically. There's also the vertical axis too, and depending on the angle that you photograph someone at, you're going to get a very, very different feeling to your photo. So what do you think, just what words come to mind when you look at these three images here? We've got a photo taken from below the subject on the left-hand side, eye level in the middle, and then above the subject on the right-hand side. The way I think about this is it's all about power dynamics, okay? When the photographer's below the subject, you're giving the subject a feeling of dominance. It's typically used for villains and things like that in movies. So it's not necessarily very flattering, but it will create a certain kind of mood. From eye level, that's your neutral sort of look. I would recommend shooting from eye level for most portraits, and that means if the person you're shooting is taller or shorter than you, adjusting the phone so that you're actually photographing them from the eye level. And then above, the photographer has the dominance in this relationship, and that'll typically give your subject a feeling of inferiority, okay? If you're photographing small kids, always crouch down to their level, because if you're photographing like this, it always makes them feel like you know, it belittles them a little bit. Getting down on them will be a much more engaging shot. Now, lens choice. I talked a bit about this as well, and I said you want to use your telephoto lens as much as possible. That is because our wide lens distorts and our telephoto lens compresses. If you don't have a dual lens system, if you've only got a wide lens, then you need to just zoom in slightly on your wide lens in order to fix this. So this is a photo here. My head is the same size in each shot, but how much more distorted is my face using the wide lens? It's quite drastic, isn't it? I wouldn't be super happy with the photo taken on the left-hand side, whereas using the telephoto lens, my features have been compressed and it's a much more flattering photo. Now, we've talked about some serious things so far, so let's talk a bit of a light-hearted approach. We're all stuck at home at the moment, and we're looking for some fun little crafty, cool ideas for us to do while we're stuck in lockdown. I'm going to jump out of here for a second, and I'm going to talk about how I do these photos here. So my whole arts practice, a lot of it is doing sort of experimental portraiture, and I'm constantly finding ways in order to try and distort the image in a number of different sort of formats. And one of those ways is by using physical barriers between the camera and your subject. So with I don't know if anyone's sort of using Snapchat or heard of Snapchat filters or any of those sort of things, but I sort of think about this stuff as like a analog version of Snapchat. And it's all done just by using a few glasses, so drinking glasses that you can find anywhere littered around your home. Let me pop my phone back on the screen again, and I'll show you how it's done. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that. Oh, that's glitching out a bit. Let me just stop that for a second and try once again. There you go. That looks like a little bit better. Okay, so you can see here, I've got it's a bit of Inception sort of stuff there, but I've got my camera, and I might even try flipping it around to portrait mode so you can actually see me here. And now I've got a simple drinking glass. So watch what happens as I hold that glass up to the camera. You can see how it starts to distort my features. And lots of different glasses will do different things depending on the sort of shape of the glass, how thick the glass is, how good the construction is. I'm getting a little bit of flare off there just from the lights I'm using for the actual stream. But I'll tell you what, if you've got some kids or some grandkids, you'll have hours of fun doing this. And it's just a super fun, cool way in order to take a portrait that's maybe not your sort of stereotypical portrait. Let's jump back there and we'll keep going with the actual content. Right. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Lightroom camera. And what I'll get you to do, if you haven't picked up your phone already, grab it for me, because we're going to go through the Lightroom camera portion of the app together, and we're going to take our first photo. We're going to take a selfie, and while we're taking our selfies, we're going to think about how the light works and how the elements around us are helping us or hindering our composition. Okay? Now, if you've got any questions as we go, try and pop them in the chat. As I said, I'll try and answer your questions. I'm keeping an eye on things, but there is the handout that will come with this session, so you can always refer back to that if you get a little bit lost. Okay, let's go back to my screen and we'll jump into the Lightroom app. All right, so I've got my phone here and I've got the Lightroom app. I'm going to open that up. I'm already in the camera, so I'm just going to close out of that to start with. But this is the screen you will see for your default screen. When you first open and log into Lightroom, it's called the library, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. Now, you'll notice down the bottom right-hand corner here, I have a blue sort of icon. I've got a picture icon on the left-hand side and a camera icon on the right-hand side. And if I just click onto that camera icon, it's going to pull up the camera app. When you open the camera side of it for the first time, you're going to be in automatic mode. There aren't really any benefits to using automatic mode over the normal default camera mode. So I'd sort of skip straight past this. The reason we've downloaded this app is so we can get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of things. So we're going to go into the professional mode just by clicking in the bottom left-hand side there and choosing professional. Now, I've got a comprehensive guide to what all these different symbols means in the handout. So I'm not going to go through every single thing right now because you can go back and read through that yourself. But there are a couple of things I really want to point out. The first one is this icon at the top here where it says DNG. And I'm going to turn this around so rather than seeing my keyboard, you're actually seeing me talk. All right, so at the top here we have something. It's not going to let me do it with the front camera, but it says JPEG now, or JPG. And if I just turn that back to here, I've got the letters D and G now. If I click on that, it'll let me swap between the two of them. What a JPEG is a very compressed kind of image. It's a standardized kind of image, whereas a DNG is a higher quality file size. So if you really wanted to get the most quality out of your photos, then shooting in DNG is worthwhile doing. I will say with the Lightroom app, it is a little bit funny. So any photos that we take with the Lightroom camera sort of get locked in the app. They don't end up with the rest of your photos on your phone. But we will talk about a way of getting the photos out of Lightroom and back to with all the other photos through a process called the export process. Another couple of things I want to point out. So we talked about the rule of thirds before. Just by clicking on these top three sort of the icon that's three little dots on the top right hand side there, it opens up some new options for me. And one of those options is a grid overlay. Clicking on that middle one there gives us the rule of thirds. So if you're wanting a bit of a guideline while you're actually shooting to help you with your composition, you can leave that grid on all the time. It's not going to actually show up in your images. It's just there as a guideline. We don't need to see that I'm using the free trial, but it's quite useful. Okay, I used to have this on all the time when I was first getting into photography. Really helped me understand or get a feeling for composition, and then it becomes more of a gut instinctual thing after a while. Another thing here too, for those who like straight horizons, there is a spirit level in here as well. So if I turn that on, you can see there's a little sort of yellow icon in the middle there, and if I get everything lined up, so that's perfectly horizontal. All right, if you're photographing, the ocean or anything with a very strong line through it, buildings, architecture, that spiral level will really come in handy to making sure that you've got all your lines nice and straight. I'm going to leave the rule of thirds on, but I'll turn the spiral level off for now. This works the same as your default camera app in the sense that wherever you touch is where the camera is going to focus and lock exposure on. So if I was taking a photo of me, I'd want to make sure that I exposed and focused for the highlight side of my face. So I want to click and have that rectangle somewhere on the left-hand side there, around about where my eye is. That's the most important thing to get nice and sharp. Down the bottom here, we've got a number of different options. I'm not going to talk about shutter speed, ISO, or white balance, but I will adjusting the exposure in your image. So if it's too bright or too dark, and this is using fully automated modes. Sorry, my phone's disconnected there. Let me just try turning that back on. There we go. And you'll see if I push this to the left-hand side, the image gets darker all the way down to -3, and the right-hand side, the image gets brighter. And what you can do is keep shooting in automatic. You don't need to go to full manual, but you can use the exposure compensation to adjust the automatic exposure to give you a little bit more precision with your exposure, okay? Now, we've talked a little bit about the camera. I should also say too, if you missed where it was to turn the front-facing camera on so you can do a selfie, it's this icon in the top right here with the camera symbol with the sort of 2 arrows. What I want you to do now is take a quick selfie for me, okay? We want to have one photo in our Lightroom catalog so that we can sort of get in and start editing that photo in a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use the rule of thirds. While you're taking your selfie, just have a look and see how the light changes depending on where you're positioned. If you notice I swing around, look at this here. This isn't going to work very well, right? Because I've got a bright light source behind me, created from the lights that I'm using to stream. My face is in shadow. This is a similar sort of problem that we had with the first original bad photo that I showed you. Whereas if I come to this side, getting some nice, beautiful, soft light across my face, a nice little highlight in the eyes there. So I'm probably going to take my selfie somewhere around about here. Maybe I'll do it from a lower angle just to sort of mix things up a bit. Do a bit of a cheeky head tilt perhaps, and use the lines from the room there just to sort of direct the eye towards my face. And there we go. Nice and cheesy. Okay. So do that for me. Hopefully you don't have too many troubles using it, and we're going to keep moving along. Man, time is flying. we might go a little bit past 7 o'clock. I'll make sure we do leave some time at the end for question and answering though. I can't see any questions, so I'm hoping everyone managed to pull up the Lightroom app and access the camera without any trouble, but you can yell out at the end if you're having any trouble. Now, we're going to just keep going ahead, And we're going to talk a little bit about the food photograph, a little bit about the abstract photograph, and then we're going to get into some editing. And we'll start to actually use that photo that we just took, make some changes to it through Lightroom, and then make some changes through it to PixArt as well. I'm going to share my screen again so you can see what's going on. And with the food photograph, we're going to talk about form and space. Now, there's a bit of a stigma to food photography, the Instagram generation, but I'll tell you what, people who are taking photos of themselves all the time and taking photos of their food all the time are good photographers, and that's because they're practicing all the time. We can use photography when we're doing these things in our daily lives as little exercises, and you should always try and get the best photo you can regardless of what you're shooting. Now, with food, if you do want to take photos of your food, I'm sure there's some home cooks out there. You, again, want to tell a story, always best to photograph it fresh if possible. You'll notice with the coffees here, they're getting a little bit old in the shot and they're starting to get a little bit gross and bubbly. So you want to try and get things fresh if you can. And we're really focusing on the aesthetics, the composition, the color, and the shape. Now, the kind of lighting in this photo here is just window lighting. Exact same lighting as the portrait, photographed on a table from above, and the lighting's coming from the side, slightly from the back. You see this in food photographs all the time. So let's break it down. Whenever I'm creating an image like this, I always start with the main thing, the subject. And in this case, it's our plate with the 3 brownies on it. From there, I start to add in my larger elements, my larger shapes. So we've got the baking tray, we've got a cutting board, and also a tablecloth. From there, start to add in the minor props, so just filling in some of that space again, and we've added some more plates, some utensils, and some mugs. And then finally from there, we sort of add all the minor little details that give the photograph a little bit more life and make it a little bit more believable. Now, what's actually happening in these images? Well, there's a couple of things happening. On the left-hand side, we're having a look at the edge elements and also the negative space, or the things that are filling in the negative space. What you'll see in a lot of food photographs is these things here. They're called edge elements, and you'll notice I've got all these things that are actually going off the edge of the frame. Now, the reason we do this in food photographs is because when we see an image like this, it feels like we're looking at a portion of some larger scene, okay? So there's something happening around the image, and it gives it a little bit more liveliness. It makes it a little bit more believable. If you've just got everything fitting neatly in the middle of the frame, it can work for minimalist images, but it does feel a little bit stale, particularly for this sort of like domestic, rustic sort of setting. A little bit of haphazardness, a little bit of chaos gives it a little bit of life. We've also got these crumbs sort of, just dotted throughout the scene too. Without these crumbs, this would be what we call negative space. So it would be space with zero detail or very little detail. Negative space isn't necessarily a bad thing. You use it all the time in minimalist photography, and we'll talk about it in the abstract photographs. But in this sort of situation, just filling in that space a little bit, again, helps underpin that narrative. Now, let's talk about the shapes that are being used in the image. When you're photographing food from above like this, or anything from above, you call this like a flat lay or an overhead shot, we're really emphasizing the geometry in the image. Look at this and think about what the sort of shapes are that you first see. The most obvious one are the rectangles from the brownies, but in fact the rectangles are actually the least prominent shape in this composition. The composition is mainly made up of circles and triangles. Even the rectangular brownies down here are actually forming a triangle. And circles or curves and triangles are always very dynamic in a composition, okay? They help with the flow of the image and they give it a bit of sort of energy and a bit of life. All these things here, the baking tray, the cutting board, the mugs, the plates, the tablecloth even, are all placed in a particular way in order to create circles and triangles. And again, this doesn't happen by accident. Okay, so as photographers, nothing happens by accident. We always want to be conscious of things while we're shooting and conscious of the way that we can craft a scene, even when we're shooting sort of candid stuff, in order to track photos. Okay, and we're going to talk about form, and we're going to talk about light again as well. Okay, let me swap back to the screen here. So, principles of abstract photography. This is the kind of photography that isn't illustrative, okay? We talked about illustrative photography before. This one's more formalist or figurative in nature. And abstract photography is really about what you reveal and what you hide. It's about amplifying elements of the subject, such as their shape, texture, color, pattern, or repetitious elements, in order to create some sort of formal quality. Even when we're shooting abstract photographs, we still want to remember composition. So these are a few things that you can shoot at home, okay? We've got forks, paper, and a glass. Again, photographed in pretty unique sort of ways. I'm going to show you how to do this in just a sec. But in all these photographs, rule of thirds is still at play and lines still at play as well. Even in this photograph of the paper in the middle here, we've still got the rule of thirds going. Even though it appears chaotic, this larger portion of the shadow here pulls our eye in this direction. And we've also got lines created by the creases all pointing towards that part too. So you can still find order in chaos. Now, this is a really fun little exercise to do at home, all right? Find as many sort of random things around the house you can. Forks are perfect. Glasses, paper, whatever. But that's just to sort of get you started. You can go off from there. And what you want to do is grab a hard light source, okay? So something like this here. I've got a head torch, but for the time being, if you don't have a head torch just lying around, you can also use the torch on your phone too, okay? So that'll work just as well. But what it is just a matter of playing and placing the elements and then changing the direction of the light in order to shape that element in different ways and create different kind of patterns, create different sort of relationships between all these things. I'm going to swap over to my phone now so you can actually see this happening in the flesh. All right, let's share my screen again. Let's jump out of my presentation and let's jump back into the phone, which I'll probably need to start again. Oh no, it's still working. Beautiful. So I've got a few things here and I'm going to swap back to this so you can see it a bit better. I've got some forks on my glass and a piece of paper too. All right. I'm going to pop my piece of paper on the table here. This is what I'm going to use as my backdrop, but anything that's white would work well in this sort of situation. Now, you're not going to see as a dramatic effect with this because I've got my lights on for my video. Or, your phone torch or whatever. Use that as the sole light source in the room. Let me turn. Technology, love you, but you do make my life difficult sometimes. All right, so use this as your sole light source. All right, but let me turn this on. And I'm going to place my fork down here. And just have a look. As I move my light around, the shape created by that shadow changes, okay? And if I put a couple of forks down, then I can start to play around with the pattern of the two of them a little bit. And all you want to do in this little exercise is just take a couple of objects, take a light source and shine them, move them. Something that you can easily move will help you sort of play around with the shadows and the elements and the composition a little bit. If I grab my glass instead, let's pop this down. Now I can shine the light through the glass like that there in order to create shadows, and I can also shine it directly through as well. Okay, so just again playing around with the positioning of that, and when I find a pattern that I sort of like, that would be when I would take the photo. The last example there with a scrunched up bit of paper, I'm just going to give this a quick scrunch here, try and do this one-handed, flatten this out again, but same principle sort of applies. Okay, got my light source down to the side and I'm just moving that around to try and create different patterns, different shapes depending on the position of that. Nice and easy. So that's something you can have a play around with. As soon as we finish the class, maybe go to the kitchen, grab a few things and see what abstract images you can come up with. As far as the light source goes, best kind of light source for doing this sort of abstract photography is a hard light source. So with portraits, we like soft light sources, and windows are perfect as a soft light source. But for abstract photos like these ones here, we want a hard light source. And the hardness or the softness of the light source is dictated by the size of the light source. So this is a very small light source here, so it's going to be a hard light. Windows is a very big light source, so it's going to be a soft light. Try and find the hardest, brightest light that you can to do those interesting sort of shadow-based abstract photos. All right, now we've got 5 minutes left. Okay, well, 5 minutes in the main session. So I'm going to quickly go through some editing in Lightroom and also some editing in PixArt to show you the last couple of things that we're doing for this workshop, and you can follow along with me as we go here. One thing I will say, again, remind you about the handout. There's going to be some information about the library side of Lightroom in the handout. I'm going to skip over that for now, just so we're conscious of time, but have a read through. All the instructions are there, really easy to follow with pictures to show you how to use your library to organize your images. Okay, let's jump back onto my screen and onto my phone, and we'll have a look and see what we can come up with in the Lightroom app. Just connect my phone again. Beautiful. All right, so I'm going to jump out. I was just in the standard app then for convenience sake, but I'm going to jump back into Lightroom. I'm going to exit out of the camera just by pressing that X in the top left. And what I'm going to do now is go into my photographs. So I've got all photos here. These are all the photos that I've taken for class, popped in so that we can easily sort of find them. Actually, I'm in my album at the moment. I want to go into all photos. Anyway, now I'm going to use a photo that I shot earlier actually to do this little exercise. It gets so many photos of me. Where are you? This one here is quite nice. Okay, now at the moment I'm in the review part of Lightroom. I want to get out of that by clicking the word review at the top and going into edit. So anytime you're jumping between the different modes, you do it via that top button there. I'm going to show you a couple of common things that you can do here. First one is the crop. So we've got all our options in the toolbar down the bottom, and I can swipe through those options just by moving my finger left or right along the toolbar. I'm going to go into crop, and I've got a number of different choices here. First thing I'm going to do is choose a different aspect ratio on the left-hand side. So I'm going to click on that and go for a square image. So 1:1 will give me square. If you're putting photos on Instagram, 1:1 is a common format, also 4:5 or 5:4. You can't put photos on Instagram at their native ratio straight out of your phone, so be aware of that. Now, here I can either crop in or crop out just by dragging from one of the corners. So I can make the crop smaller, and then once I've made it smaller, I can change the position of that by dragging my finger around the middle of that crop window. All right, and I'm going to end up, we'll go something about this here. I think will work for the example that we're going to use for. And I'm going to just click that tick button in the bottom right hand side to confirm that crop. Now, beautiful thing about Lightroom is that none of these changes are permanent. Okay, it's non-destructive editing suite. So it means that every time I make a change, it's basically overlaying a filter onto the photo. And I can always go back to the original. All right, so I'm never ruining the original photograph by this. All I'm doing is adding a sort of filter to it, and I can always do a reset if I need to and go straight back to the start. All right, some other editing programs like PixArt, for example, will actually affect the original image. Some other common places that might be useful for you to look. We've got the light portion of Lightroom. This is where we control all our exposure related things. I've got the exposure slider, that'll do overall brightness adjustments. Sliding that to the right will make everything in the image brighter. Sliding it to the left will make everything in the image darker. I think the exposure is pretty good in this example. Might just add a little bit of contrast though. So contrast makes your brighter tones brighter and your darker. So that's going to add a little bit of punch to the image there. We've also got highlights, shadows, whites and blacks. What these do is only affect specific parts of the image. So highlights and whites will only affect the brighter tones of the image. Shadows and blacks will only affect the darker tones of the image. But they're still doing exposure related adjustments. So you can see if I drag the shadow slider to the left there, it's making the shadows in the image darker, but it's leaving the highlights alone. Going to pop out of light and go into color now. All sorts of different things we can do in color. We've got tint and temperature. They control the color balance. So either I can make that photo cooler or warmer, for example. You can use the temperature and the tint to neutralize color tones. So if you've got really strong orange light from incandescent bulbs, for example, you can add more blue in to neutralize that, or you can also use it to create mood. We've also got our saturation. Saturating is generally not a good idea for skin tones because I'm already looking quite pink in this at the moment. I might actually want to desaturate it a little bit to take out some of those pink hues. But for your landscapes and that sort of thing, a little bit of saturation will go a long way. And if you'll notice right at the top here, I've also got B&W, the black and white mix. Clicking on that will change my image to black and white. And it actually looks quite nice in black and white. I would say if you want to edit an image of black and white, do this first and then go in and do your exposure adjustments. So you're actually adjusting the image in its black and white form. But nice and quick and easy, click of the button and we've got a nice black and white photo. Can jump out of color and go to the next one over, which is effects. A couple of things I want to show you in here. The first one is split toning, the top right hand side of the effects bar there. Click into that, and what that lets me do is add a sort of color hue to the highlights and the shadows of this image. So what I'm going to do is a bit of a sort of selenium kind of look, which is a selenium process was an old process we used to do in analog sort of days. But I'm going to add a little bit of sort of bluey magenta to the shadows and a little bit of orange to the highlights just by clicking and dragging in those hue and saturation bars down there. You don't want to overcook this, so less is more when you're doing split toning, but you can do this to color images too, and it can create some interesting sort of effects. Just have a little bit of a play around and see what you like the look of. Going to click done there. And another thing I'm going to do at the moment is add a bit of a vignette. So a vignette will add just sort of darkened edges to the image, and what that'll help I'll do is just bring the viewer's eye into the frame. So you can see as I'm going to do an extreme version of it. Let me get rid of this too. So that's an extreme vignette there. I'm not going to go quite that hard, but I'm going to go down to maybe -35 and see how that looks. Now, hopefully you've been having a little bit of a play around with this while you're getting, while you've been talking about it. I see a question there from Dawn. How do you get rid of shadows? Long story short, you can't. You can diminish them by increasing the brightness of the shadows. So if I move my shadow slider, let me go back onto my screen here. If I move my shadow slider to the right, it will diminish the presence of them. But if you've got shadows in the image, you can't remove them. Okay, at least not in the scheme of the way that we're talking about things at the moment. It's too difficult for the principles of this class here. All right, unfortunately. Now we've done all these changes. What do we do? I said before that when you take a photo, it exists within the Lightroom bubble. So we need to go through one more step before we can actually share this photo with other people. And that's called the export process. All right. So I'm going to jump back over to my screen. I'm going to show you how to do that. Follow this along with me and we'll open up that image in PixArt and we're going to make a couple more changes to it by doing a double exposure. Double negative exposure. Something like that. All right, let me swap back to my screen and we can see this process. So right at the top here, you'll notice there's an icon with, it's sort of like a square with an arrow in it. That's our export button. I'm going to click onto that and it's going to give me a number of different options of where I want to send this photo to. For now, I'm just going to export to the camera roll. Okay, so that's the 1, 2, 3, 4th option from the bottom. That way that photo will end up with all the other photos that I would have taken with my normal default camera. Hit that, save there, and I've got one photo successfully exported. Now, I'm going to jump out of the Lightroom app for now. That's all we're going to look at, and we're going to go into the PicsArt app now. So pull up the PicsArt app. If you're opening this up for the first time, you will have to log in. And what I want to do is open up that image that I just exported in Lightroom and make a couple more changes. I do that by pressing this plus button down the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to press that plus button, and you'll notice that right up in the top left there, that's that photo that we just exported from Lightroom. I'm going to click into that, and that'll load it into PicsArt. Now, PicsArt's a little bit less forgiving than Lightroom, okay? So making changes in PicsArt is a permanent thing. So just be conscious of that. It's not going to overwrite your original photo because we'll save it as a different photo at the end, but it's much harder to sort of go back and undo changes, unlike Lightroom. Now that I've got that photo loaded in, I'm going to scroll through the bottom toolbar there, and I'm going to go to the Add Photo option. Click onto that, and it's going to bring up both the photos in my photo roll and also some free images. I'm going to click on free images in the top left for this example, and I'll be able to look for some stock images in order to put over that image. I'm going to go to gears. I've tell you what, I've actually practiced this already before the class, and I'm going to use this photo of some gears here. I'm going to click on that photo in the bottom rightish area, and I'm going to hit add, and that's going to add it to my image. I think the gears work nicely for this photo. It's sort of a very, it's a photo where I look deep in thought, so the cogs and the wheels turning help fit in the mood. And you can use the double sort of exposure effect like this in order to create a nice juxtaposition between two images. Now, I'm just dragging this around by clicking and holding in the middle of that top photo. And what I want to do is make this top photo bigger. And I do that by clicking and dragging in the right-hand side where it's got that double sort of arrow icon. And I'm going to keep clicking and dragging until this has covered my entire image. Now, it's a little bit hard to see what's going on at the moment, so I'm going to actually lower the opacity using that slider down the bottom too, just so I can see what's actually sitting behind the photograph, and I can position that a little bit better. Now, that looks pretty good. It'll do for now. I'm going to pop over. If you notice down the bottom, we've got opacity on the left-hand side and then blend next to it. I'm going to jump into the blend section, and this is going to change the way that those two photos are blending together. Now, different photos will work differently depending on which ones you're using, but I would say that screen typically works the best for doing this sort of effect. So I'm going to pop into screen there and just have a look and see how the different sort of blend modes work. You can keep jumping back and forth between the blend mode and the opacity as well, because you want to sort of just play around with the relationship between these two things. And this is just part of the editing process, a little bit of trial and elimination. It's all part of the fun. So let's say I'm happy with that blend, I'm happy with the opacity. One thing I do want to change though is that it's a little bit distracting having these cogs over my face. So I want to remove them. The way I'm going to do that is by erasing that part of the image. If you look at the very top here, I've got a little sort of eraser icon. I'm going to click into that, and that's going to bring up my erase tool. Down the bottom, I'm going to click into the erase tool there, and I'm just going to click into that a second time, which will bring up the tools options for me. Whenever you're erasing, you want to do it at a low opacity and a low hardness, and you want to sort of do it a little bit at a time. So I'm just going to drop the opacity to 30, hardness to about 50, and I'm going to increase my brush size to about 60 or so. And what I'm going to do is just swipe over the parts of the image that I want to erase over and over again, like a paintbrush. I'm just slowly brushing those parts away. So maybe we'll do the whole head, something like that there. And just doing it little bits at a time. The slower you sort of do it, the more natural this will look. Okay. Now, if you do too much, you can click over to restore and you can paint it back in. All right. So nothing's set in stone at this stage, but you just sort of go back and forth, slowly, restoring or erasing until you get something you're happy with. And once we're happy with it, we click on the little tick in the top right-hand side, and that will confirm that sort of effect. Last thing I need to do is apply this now. And once I hit apply, this is sort of set in stone. Okay, so you want to make sure you're happy with how things look, and then we hit apply. And then what it's going to do is sort of merge those two layers together. Again, I need to save this photo. So before I can sort of share it with someone, I need to go through one more step. To do that, I'm going to hit next at the top right of the screen. And then I'm going to hit save down the bottom. Okay, gives me a few different options. I'm going to choose download photo and save this picture on my device. Whoop, not too far. Now it's saved. And if I just go back into my normal photos, we can see the saved version of that image there with all my other photos. Okay, so it's 10 past 8. And I said I was going to finish at 8 o'clock, but we've sort of gone through all the content there. One more question by Rintu: how to get rid of glare on my glasses. Again, way too complicated in order to do with something like a phone editing app. You really need to look at how light works to deal with things like glare. And what I'll show you just quickly. Okay, so if I hold this glass up, right, we're getting reflection in the glasses from my lights in the background. It's called specular reflection. And the way that light works is that the angle that it hits something, it bounces off at that same angle. So if I'm pointing a glass, if I've got a glass here and I've got a light that's sitting just behind there, it's coming from there, hitting the glass and bouncing straight back. What you want to do when you're lighting glass objects is trying to have the light coming from the side. All right, so that would mean, say, if you're photographing a portrait with next to a window, you'd have the window to the side of the person so that the light's bouncing off the glasses and going off that way. That is by far the easiest way to fix that problem. Doing it in Photoshop is a nightmare and it'll never really look too good. That's something we need to do when we're actually taking the photo. Now, Sarah, I'm pretty much done. Oh, I am done with the content so far. There are a couple of things we skipped over, but they're all in the handout for you to go back and read through. There's 4,000 words there. I'm super happy with it, and that's for you to take home and reflect on after the class. So you can always follow through that step by step if you haven't followed things exactly. We still another 5 minutes or so for Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone's got any questions, pop them in the chat, or if you'd like to just switch your mic on and just, have a chat with Chris directly, feel free. But yeah, thank you, Chris. This has been amazing. There's so much information here. Yeah, we've covered so much in the space of an hour and 10 minutes. It's phenomenal. That educates the resource that I emailed through at about 6 o'clock tonight. Everyone should hopefully have a copy of that sitting in their inbox. If you don't, maybe just comment in the chat, let me know so I can resend it to you. But yeah, that's a really super comprehensive resource. So I'll just be quiet for a second. So if anyone actually wants to ask a question, they can.
I must have been pretty eloquent. Is the telephoto zoom an iPhone setting or an automatic thing? It's something you need to prompt. So let me I'll pull out my phone again and I'll show you where it is on the iPhone. I don't exactly know where it is on Android, but in the Lightroom, I'll show you in the Lightroom app, I think, because that'll be the one that you'll hopefully start to use more. Just give me 1 sec to load this back up. So PixArt is free, all right? You don't need to buy the subscription. There are some benefits that you can do from using the subscription. If it gives you the ad for the subscription when you first open it up, there should be an X in the top left-hand side to close it down. But you don't need to buy it for any of those things that I was doing in the class just then. That's all free. And my screen mirroring thing has decided to maybe stop working. At least it stopped working now rather than the start. Hang on, let me just hold my screen up to the camera and I'll show you where it is. side here, next to the shutter button, there's a T and W, all right? That swaps between the telephoto and the wide lens. The other way to zoom in is by physically pinching and dragging on the actual screen. You want to avoid doing that because that's the one that's going to reduce the resolution. If you've got a dual lens system, clicking that button down there will swap you back and forth, okay? But again, not every camera has that. It just depends on how the hardware is sort of set up. I'm going to have one more try at this so I can try and show you a little bit better. Yes, it is working. Share here. Here you go. If you can't find it though, it's in the handout, all right? So don't despair, have a look at the handout. You'll see what all the different icons are, the ones we've talked about, plus more on your actual screen. So yeah, refer to that. That's probably the best thing I can do for now. Any other questions?
Hi Chris, it's Rob here.
Hey Rob.
Hi. Not so much a question, but I use my iPhone to take photos all the time, and I've been using it for years and years and years. And I thought at the start of this I would learn some new skills, and I sure have. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was fantastic. Really enjoyed it.
Great. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Always wonderful to hear that.
Just checking the chat, see if there's any more questions. Someone's asked when the recording will be available, so it should be available on the Bunjil Place website, hopefully from tomorrow afternoon. It just depends on how slammed the website team are and how much they've got going on. But yeah, hopefully from tomorrow afternoon, if not Friday, I think. All right. That could possibly be it, Chris. We might be done.
Beautiful. Well, it's been a blast. Hopefully you've all picked something up. One sort of final thing I wanted to say was just to use photography as much as you can. There's many wonderful things to photograph out there. Every time you pick up your camera, think of it as a chance to practice, to get better. And one thing I really want to say is how important photographs are too. They capture memories. And just sort of like a little bit of a somber story to finish off with. My family cat got put down yesterday, and if anyone's lost a pet, really, really sad sort of experience. But I have so many great photos of that cat, of her lying with me, lying in the sun, and every time I look back at those, it makes me smile, it makes me cry a little bit. But that's the power of the image. It's such a powerful device and a powerful thing. So, make sure you're experiencing moments when you're out there photographing, but take photos, print them off, put them in scrapbooks, share them, whatever, because they're such a powerful thing and they're such a beautiful way of sort of reliving moments.
Very nicely said, and sorry that your family cat got put down.
That's sad.
It's very sad. It is. But anyway, thank you so much for tonight. Someone else has asked if we're going to be doing one of these again. Possibly. We've had a lot of interest in this workshop, so we may run it again. But the recording will definitely be available. If you missed anything, it'll be available on the website. All right, that brings us to the end, I think. So thanks everyone. Thank you, Chris, for your time, and hopefully we'll see everyone again at another workshop.
Bye everyone. Thanks for coming.
Bye everyone.